All right, today we are running a kind of forensic audit on our own species. We're looking at a strange signal, a glitch hidden in human blood that's found in millions of people, and it might just rewrite the entire story of who we are and where we came from. Let's get into it.
So I want you to start with this question right here. What if a significant chunk of the human population, about 15%, has blood that just doesn't fit? According to the source material we're looking at today, this isn't some hypothetical. It's a real-life clue, one that points to a far stranger origin story than most of us have ever been told.
So what are we talking about here? We're talking about Rh-negative blood. Now, it's actually defined by what it's missing, a specific protein called the rhesus factor, or Rh factor. It's pretty simple. If your red blood cells have this protein, you're Rh positive. If you don't have it, you're Rh negative. Seems like a tiny biological detail, right? Well, as we're about to see, that tiny difference creates some massive, unexplainable problems.
And that brings us to the first part of this whole investigation, the core anomaly. The source material calls it a ghost in our veins. I love that. It's like a trace element, a piece of data that really challenges what we think we know about evolution, and hints that maybe there's a story that's been deliberately erased. 15%. That's roughly how many people around the world carry this Rh-negative blood type.
Now, you got to understand, this isn't some super rare mutation affecting a handful of people. Now, this is a significant, stable minority within the human race. It's a piece of code that just keeps persisting, even against some pretty incredible biological odds.
So why is this such a big problem for standard evolutionary theory? Well, the idea presented here is that it's basically a glitch in the matrix, a forensic signature that just doesn't belong. It's a piece of code that shouldn't exist by the normal rules. And when you start pulling on that one little thread, the whole official story starts to come undone. And here's the first major piece of evidence that our source points to, the primate disconnect. Look, if humans evolved from a common primate ancestor, our basic blood chemistry should show a clear, unbroken line of descent. But it doesn't. 100% of primates, every single one, is Rh positive. Humanity is the only exception on this entire branch of the evolutionary tree.
Which leads us to the real kicker of a question. The theory here isn't just that this is a mutation. It's the total absence of a foundational gene from our supposed ancestors. It just appears out of nowhere in the genetic record. So you have to ask, if this blood type has no terrestrial precedent, no evolutionary trail, where in the world did it come from?
Okay, so if that wasn't strange enough, let's move on to exhibit number 2. This is what the source calls the biological smoking gun. This is where the anomaly stops being just a passive genetic marker and becomes something active, something hostile, a kind of civil war that's being fought at the most fundamental level, inside the womb. This is called Hemolytic Disease of the newborn, or HDN. Here's how it works. Picture an Rh-negative mother carrying an Rh-positive child. Her body can actually mistake her own baby's blood for a foreign invader, like a virus. Her immune system then gets to work, creating antibodies to fight it. Now, for the first baby, it's usually okay, but in her next pregnancy with another Rh-positive baby, those primate antibodies can cross the placenta and attack the fetus's red blood cells. Now, just stop and think about that for a second. From a purely evolutionary standpoint, a trait that causes a mother's body to literally attack its own offspring, that should have been weeded out of the gene pool thousands of years ago. And yet here it is. It persists.
And this leads to an absolutely chilling interpretation from our source. The idea is that this isn't a disease at all. It's a failed quarantine protocol. It's the original human hardware, call it Human 1.0, recognizing a foreign piece of software that's been added later and trying its best to delete the virus. So that leads us directly into this theory of two different human operating systems. The source basically says that our species isn't one unified thing. We're a hybrid split right down the middle between an original pure blueprint and a later downgraded model. Here's the theory in a nutshell. The Rh-negative bloodline is Human 1.0, the original clean operating system. It's not missing a protein. No, the idea is that the Rh-positive blood type has had a protein added to it. And this added protein, the source claims, is an Archonic limiter gene that was installed in what they call the Human 2.0 slave race. The positive in Rh-positive, that's the mark. The negative is the signature of the original. And the evidence for this so-called original bloodline isn't just in our genes. You can actually see it on a map. The highest concentration of Rh-negative blood anywhere on Earth is found among the Basque people, in the mountains between Spain and France.
Their rate is nearly double the global average, around 30%. The source presents them as a remnant population, a kind of genetic time capsule of this pre-Archonic original human lineage.
All right, let's get to the climax of this whole investigation. We've laid out the anomaly, the biological conflict, and this theory of a lost original lineage. Now, we're going to examine the crime scene, what our source calls a modern-day genetic harvest, one that specifically targets the carriers of this ancient code. This is where all those separate threads really converge. According to abduction researchers cited in our source, there's a really startling statistical correlation. People with Rh-negative blood are reportedly targeted for abduction at a rate that is way, way higher than their percentage of the population. This isn't random. It's a targeted harvest.
So, who's behind this? Well, the list of suspects is interesting. First up, you've got the Greys, which the source describes not as a natural species, but as manufactured biological androids. Think of them as the cybernetic lab techs of the operation. And second, you have human military personnel in these so-called MILAB, or military abduction projects, which suggests a really disturbing joint ventures going on.
So what's the motive? Why all this genetic theft? Well, according to this theory, it's not scientific curiosity. The argument is that this is something much more desperate. It's a parasitic intelligence with broken-down hardware, one that's trying to steal back the abilities it lost by raiding the gene pool of the original human lineage. The ultimate goal here is to data mine the human 1.0 source code. They're not just collecting samples for a museum. The theory is that they are desperately trying to reverse engineer the psychic, intuitive, and energetic abilities that are inherent in this original genetic hardware, abilities that were deliberately suppressed or even bred out of the human 2.0 model. Okay, let's put it all together. Let's synthesize all the evidence presented in our source material and lay out the final verdict, what they call the complete Gnostic indictment of the Rh-negative anomaly.
So, to sum up the entire theory, the Rh-negative blood type is the signature of an original, uncorrupted human lineage. The Rh-positive factor isn't an evolution, it's a genetic downgrade, an added limiter gene. That violent immune reaction in the womb, that's a biological firewall trying and failing to reject this foreign code. And finally, the modern abduction phenomenon is a targeted genetic harvest, all driven by one motive, to steal back the advanced abilities inherent in that original human hardware.
And so the source material really leaves us with this one final, mind-bending thought. If a story this vast, this cosmic, can be hidden away in a single protein, if our very blood is the battlefield for an ancient war, what other secrets, what other lost histories and forgotten abilities are just sitting there, dormant, waiting to be reactivated inside our own DNA?